Okay, so we are continuing our discussion about mens rea, and we are going to be focusing on several principles today. We're going to expand on our concept of mental culpability, and we're going to focus on the MPC approach. We're going to talk about transferred intent more specifically, and we're going to talk about strict liability, and we'll give a couple of cases as to strict liability to help us understand that principle a little better. Let's talk about mental culpability. So yesterday we focused on the common law approach to mental culpability, and the thing to note there is that there are a lot of terms that common law uses to denote culpability. They have malice, they have intent, they've got all these variations, hundreds of variations to say, yes, this is how you determine whether or not someone has mens rea. And the MPC is like, okay, let's try and narrow that down a little bit. And they give us 4 terms that are defined as culpability. And that's purposefully, knowingly, recklessly, and negligently. A lot of jurisdictions have adopted this MPC approach to this because it takes those hundreds of terms and consolidates them into these 4. And so most of the time we are going to see one of these terms. The important thing to note is that there are also elements to this. Each mental culpability part also needs to meet this material element. And there are 3 kinds of elements. There's a conduct, there's a circumstances element, and then there's a result. We've talked about those briefly before, but each one of these need to be tied together. So that's the actus reus along with the mental culpability, the mens rea. Let's talk about each of those 4 just briefly, give them a little bit of a definition. So purposefully means that you need to have a conscious object, and that is just saying that a person has the conscious objective of having an event happen, or at least they hope that an event is going to happen. Knowingly means that they are consciously aware of the circumstances, or they are practically certain that those circumstances are there. Recklessly means that you are conscious of a risk, but you continue to do your actions anyway. So your actions create a risk, you're aware of that risk, but you continue to go along with the unjustified action. And then negligence, criminal negligence is going to be different from tort negligence, is where you should have known that your actions are going to create a risk, but your actions are then still unjustifiable. And there's this moral justification that needs to go with all of these things. We need to make sure that there is mens rea so that we can actually punish justly. Let's talk about transferred intent just briefly. MPC statute or section 2.032 defines intent, says that intent can transfer from person to person, or it can also transfer from one harm to a lesser harm. So, for example, say under the common law, which also covers the MPC, common law, I throw a rock at a person and I hit another person. That works. But if I throw a rock at a person and hit a property, break a window, and then there's no transferred intent. Under MPC, however, if I throw a rock at a person and damage a property of a lesser harm than hitting another person, well, then I can transfer that intent to the lesser harm, meaning they can be charged for something less serious than aggravated battery or aggravated assault at an individual. Okay, strict liability. Here we have 2 cases. There's Morissette versus United States, and what happened in this instance is that an individual went out, he was hunting, he didn't get anything, and the property that he was on had some previously expired bomb casings, and he took them and used them for making a little bit of money to cover up the expenses for the hunting trip because he didn't get anything from it. Well, he was charged, and they said that there was strict liability, even though the statute didn't put mens rea to the statute. Because the statute didn't have any mens rea, he was strictly liable for his actions. The court disagrees. They say that mens rea should be added to the statute unless there are very few circumstances. And some of those circumstances include minor violations, which are like fines, traffic offenses or minor violations, public welfare offenses, and these are more serious, like food and liquor violations. And then there's specifically worded federal statutes that can be allowed to be strictly liable. So if the statute says they are going to be held liable for this regardless of whether or not they know it's lawful. And then statutes with more compelling purposes, and that is just saying if there's a very compelling reason for this to be strictly liable, well then, and that typically falls under the public welfare offenses, and then they can be strictly liable. Staples v. United States kind of deals with the very similar circumstances, but ultimately what we take away from strict liability is that the MPC tried to limit strict liability, but offered just a couple of exceptions, and those exceptions are the ones that I just listed. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Law Schoolers. Before I let you go, there are 4 things I want to say. The first thing is if you enjoyed these episodes and if you enjoyed the website, I would invite you to go and join Law Schoolers Pro, and you can do that by going to lawschoolers.com/join. It's a way for you to support us, but there's also a lot of features there that I think you will enjoy. Second thing is that nearly all of our episodes are unedited. The only ones that aren't are pre-law materials, and the reason for that is so you can actually see the legal material in its raw form as I'm learning it as well. The third thing is that the information contained in these episodes are specifically only for educational purposes. They're not to be used as legal advice, and with that, the fourth thing is if it is used as legal advice, we are not liable. That is, Law Schoolers is not liable for any legal outcomes. Thank you again for enjoying the show. Have a good one.